used to believe that parents were permanent, like gravity or the sky, something you never questioned because it was always supposed to be there. When I was younger, I thought love was automatic, something you got simply for existing. No one tells you that love can come with conditions, or that sometimes those conditions change without warning. It started quietly. That's what makes it hurt the most when I look back. There was no shouting, no dramatic fight, no slammed doors, just distance, fewer conversations, fewer questions about my day. My parents began speaking to me like I was a guest who had overstayed their welcome. I noticed it before I understood it. Kids always do. Then came the news about the new baby. At first, I thought it meant things would get better. I thought maybe a new beginning would bring us closer, that I would finally feel like part of something important. I told myself I would help, that I would be the good child who didn't complain, who understood sacrifices. I didn't know then that I was the sacrifice. The night they told me the truth is burned into my memory. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I had eaten cereal before school for years. The light above us flickered slightly, buzzing in a way I had never noticed until that moment. My father kept his arms crossed. My mother wouldn't look at me. They said they were overwhelmed. They said things were different now. They said I was old enough to understand. I wasn't. What I understood was that they had already made a decision, and I wasn't included in it. When my father said, "You'll need to figure things out on your own," it felt unreal, like he was talking about someone else's life. I waited for him to laugh, to say he was joking, to tell me this was some strange lesson about responsibility. None of that happened. I asked where I was supposed to go. My mother finally looked up then, her eyes full, but not with love, with discomfort, like I was asking for something unreasonable. "You'll manage," she said. That was it. No plan, no reassurance, no promise to check on me. Just an ending. I packed my things in silence, a bag with clothes, a few old notebooks, and a photo I almost left behind. As I stood at the door, I realized something devastating. They weren't watching me leave. They had already emotionally moved on. That was the moment I stopped feeling like their child. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. I remember sitting on the curb for a long time, staring at the house that was no longer mine, trying to understand how people who created you could decide you were no longer their responsibility. I didn't cry right away. Shock has a way of numbing everything. The tears came later, when I realized no one was coming after me. No one was going to call and say it was a mistake. That night, I learned the most painful truth of my life. Being related to someone doesn't guarantee they'll choose you. And as I walked away with everything I owned on my back, I had no idea that this abandonment, this quiet rejection, would become the foundation of everything I would one day build without them. The first night I slept in my car, I told myself it was temporary. Just a few days, maybe a week, until I figured something out. I parked in a quiet corner of a grocery store lot, far enough from the lights that no one would notice me, but close enough that I felt slightly less alone. The seat didn't recline all the way, and every time I shifted, the springs pressed into my back. I stared at the ceiling of that car for hours, listening to the distant hum of traffic, wondering how my life had shrunk so quickly. Morning came without mercy. There was no alarm clock, no warm breakfast waiting in the kitchen. I washed my face in the store bathroom, avoided looking too closely at my reflection, and went straight to work. I smiled at customers like everything was normal, like I hadn't spent the night folded into a metal box. By the end of my shift, my feet ached, my head throbbed, and my stomach growled so loudly I worried someone might hear it. That was when I took the second job. It wasn't a choice made with confidence or ambition. It was survival. I worked mornings at one place and nights at another, grabbing whatever hours I could. Some days blurred together so completely that I forgot what day it was. I learned how to function on little sleep and even less food. I learned how to pretend I wasn't exhausted, because exhaustion doesn't earn sympathy when you have no safety net. At night, I returned to the car. I cracked the window just enough for air, pulled a jacket over myself, and tried to get comfortable. Rain was the worst. The sound of it hitting the roof made everything feel heavier, like the world was reminding me how small I had become. I wondered if my parents ever thought about where I was sleeping, or if I had already faded into something they no longer discussed. Hunger became a constant companion. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but the quiet, gnawing kind that never fully leaves. I stretched meals, counted coins, and learned which gas stations had the cleanest bathrooms and the least suspicious staff. Pride disappeared quickly when survival is on the line. What surprised me most wasn't the physical pain, it was the silence. No one checked in. No one asked how I was holding up. Every struggle happened unseen, and that loneliness carved something deep inside me. But it also taught me something important. If I was going to make it, it would be because I refused to give up on myself. There were nights when I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, fighting tears. I thought about going back, about apologizing for things I hadn't done, just to have a bed again. But then I remembered the way they looked at me when they told me to leave. I remembered how easily they let me go. So I stayed. Slowly, something changed. The pain didn't disappear, but it hardened into determination. Every shift I worked, every uncomfortable night I survived, became proof that I was stronger than the circumstances I'd been thrown into. I started saving small amounts of money. I started believing, even when it felt foolish, that this wasn't the end of my story. I was invisible to the world, sleeping in my car and working myself to exhaustion. But inside, something was growing. Resilience, independence, a quiet promise that one day I would build a life so solid that no one could ever take it away from me again. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. I remember sitting on the curb for a long time, staring at the house that was no longer mine, trying to understand how people who created you could decide you were no longer their responsibility. I didn't cry right away. Shock has a way of numbing everything. The tears came later when I realized no one was coming after me. No one was going to call and say it was a mistake. That night, I learned the most painful truth of my life. Being related to someone doesn't guarantee they'll choose you. And as I walked away with everything I owned on my back, I had no idea that this abandonment, this quiet rejection, would become the foundation of everything I would one day build without them. Success didn't arrive all at once. It came quietly, almost shyly, like it wasn't sure it was welcome in my life after everything I had been through. The first real change was stability. A small room I could afford, a door that locked, a bed that belonged to me. I remember lying there the first night, staring at the ceiling, overwhelmed by something that felt dangerously close to happiness. With stability came focus. I no longer spent every waking moment worrying about where I would sleep. I could think beyond the next shift, the next meal. I kept working 2 jobs, not because I had to anymore, but because I was terrified of falling back. Fear became my motivation. I saved aggressively, turned down distractions, and learned how to live simply without feeling deprived. I began investing in myself. I took courses when I could afford them, studied late into the night, and absorbed knowledge like it was oxygen. While others relaxed, I worked. While others complained, I planned. I wasn't chasing luxury, I was chasing security, the kind that doesn't disappear when people walk away. There were moments when anger surfaced, late nights when I wondered how much easier things would have been if my parents had chosen differently. But I didn't let that anger guide me. I had learned what resentment does. It chains you to the very people who hurt you. I wanted freedom, not revenge. Slowly, opportunities opened. A better job, then another. Each step forward felt unreal, like I was trespassing into a life that wasn't meant for someone like me. But I showed up every day, prepared, disciplined, and determined to prove that I belonged there. People began to trust me, to rely on me, to see me. The strangest part was how little my parents mattered in this new life. I didn't think about them much anymore. They existed as distant memories, not active wounds. I stopped checking social media, stopped wondering what they were doing. I had my own routines, my own goals, my own sense of worth. I had built something entirely on my own, and that realization filled me with a quiet pride. One evening, after a long day, I sat alone in my apartment with the lights off, looking out at the city. I thought about the person I used to be, the kid sitting on a curb with a bag of clothes, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. I wished I could tell them that it wouldn't always hurt like that one day, survival would turn into something more. Success didn't erase the past, but it changed my relationship with it. I no longer saw myself as the child who was left behind. I saw myself as the person who stayed standing when everything fell apart. That shift mattered more than any paycheck or promotion. I had peace now. Not the kind that comes from being surrounded by people, but the kind that comes from knowing you can handle whatever comes next. I had built a life that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or presence. And without realizing it at the time, I had built something else too, a boundary. One so strong that when my past finally came knocking, it would find no control over the future I had fought so hard to create. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. I remember sitting on the curb for a long time, staring at the house that was no longer mine, trying to understand how people who created you could decide you were no longer their responsibility. I didn't cry right away. Shock has a way of numbing everything. The tears came later, when I realized no one was coming after me. No one was going to call and say it was a mistake. That night, I learned the most painful truth of my life. Being related to someone doesn't guarantee they'll choose you. And as I walked away with everything I owned on my back, I had no idea that this abandonment, this quiet rejection, would become the foundation of everything I would one day build without them. When the knock came, I wasn't expecting anything. It was an ordinary evening, quiet and familiar, the kind I had learned to cherish. I opened the door without thinking, and suddenly the past was standing right in front of me. My parents looked older than I remembered. Time had changed them in ways it never seemed to change the memories I carried. For a moment, none of us spoke. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. They stepped inside like guests who assumed they were welcome. We sat across from each other, the distance between us filled with things no one wanted to name. They asked polite questions about my job, my place, my life. Their curiosity felt rehearsed, like a performance meant to soften what was coming next. It didn't take long. My mother's voice trembled as she explained their situation. The child they had chosen, the one they had built their new world around, was struggling. Medical bills, financial pressure, mistakes they couldn't undo. My father avoided my eyes as he spoke, like he already knew the answer and hoped silence might change it. Then came the request. They didn't frame it as a favor. They spoke as if it were natural, expected, as if time erased everything, as if blood alone obligated me to give back to people who had given up on me when it mattered most. I listened without interrupting, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to understand something about them. And in that moment, I did. They hadn't come back for me. They had come back for what I had built. When I finally spoke, my voice surprised even me. It was calm, steady, free of anger. I told them about the car, the long nights, the jobs that drained me, the hunger and the loneliness. I didn't exaggerate, I didn't accuse. I simply told the truth, start to finish. With every word, their expressions changed. Guilt surfaced too late to matter. I told them that I learned how to survive without parents, and in doing so, I learned something else. That family isn't defined by who gives birth to you, but by who stands beside you when life collapses. They cried then, real tears. But tears aren't the same as accountability. I told them I wished no harm on the child they were trying to protect, none at all. What happened wasn't their fault. But I also told them that I would not give them money, not out of cruelty, but out of honesty. You taught me to live without you, I said. I didn't ask for that lesson, but I learned it well. That was the truth they feared, not rejection, but irrelevance. I walked them to the door. There were no raised voices, no dramatic gestures, just clarity. As they left, I felt something loosen inside me. Not satisfaction, closure. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the same place I had built piece by piece. I realized then that the real victory wasn't success or stability. It was choice. I had the power to decide who had access to my life. They left with regret. I stayed with peace. And for the first time, the past had no claim on me at all. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. I remember sitting on the curb for a long time, staring at the house that was no longer mine, trying to understand how people who created you could decide you were no longer their responsibility. I didn't cry right away. Shock has a way of numbing everything. The tears came later, when I realized no one was coming after me. No one was going to call and say it was a mistake. That night, I learned the most painful truth of my life. Being related to someone doesn't guarantee they'll choose you. And as I walked away with everything I owned on my back, I had no idea that this abandonment, this quiet rejection, would become the foundation of everything I would one day build without them.
My father didn't even clear his throat before doing it. He just pushed a polished folder across the table and said my sister's name like it was a promise. Lena had been home for 7 days. I'd carried my parents for 10 years. My mother's nod was the loudest thing in the room. I didn't argue. I didn't even blink. I placed the power